The highway stretches endlessly ahead of you. Your headlights cut through the darkness like a knife through black velvet. The radio crackles with static. Your fuel gauge sits dangerously low. And then you see something in your rearview mirror that makes your blood run cold. Tonight, I'm going to share 4 true stories that will make you think twice about driving alone after dark. These aren't just tales of car trouble or wrong turns. These are encounters with something far more sinister, something that hunts in the space between streetlights. So turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. Because once you hear these stories, you'll never feel safe on a dark road again. In March 2019, 26-year-old Sarah Mitchell was driving home from her night shift at the hospital in rural Oregon. It was 2:30 a.m., and Highway 18 was completely empty. Sarah had made this drive hundreds of times. She knew every curve, every hill, every mile marker between the hospital and her small apartment. But tonight felt different. It started with headlights in her rearview mirror. Not unusual on a highway, except these lights had appeared suddenly, as if the car had materialized out of nowhere. Sarah couldn't remember seeing them merge onto the road behind her. They were just there. The distance between the cars remained constant. When Sarah sped up, the lights sped up. When she slowed down, they slowed down. Mile after mile, the headlights stayed exactly the same distance behind her. Sarah tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just another hospital worker heading home. Maybe they were just coincidentally driving the same speed. But something deep in her gut told her this wasn't coincidence. She decided to test her theory. Sarah took the next exit, a small off-ramp that led to a gas station that had been closed for years. If the car was just traveling the same route, they would continue on the highway. But as she curved down the ramp, the headlights followed. Her heart began to race. The abandoned gas station sat in a pool of broken streetlight. Sarah pulled up to the old pumps and waited, her engine running, doors locked. The other car pulled in behind her and stopped about 50 feet away. The headlights stayed on, but she couldn't make out the driver through the glare. For 5 minutes, they sat there in silence. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She reached for her phone to call 911, but realized she had no signal. The old gas station was in a dead zone. Then the other car's door opened. A figure stepped out, but Sarah couldn't make out any details in the harsh backlight of the headlights. The person appeared to be tall, wearing dark clothing. They stood perfectly still beside their car, facing her direction. Sarah's training as a nurse kicked in. She had learned to stay calm in emergencies. She put her car in reverse and slowly backed away from the pumps. The figure didn't move. She turned around and drove back toward the highway, checking her mirror constantly. The headlights followed. Back on Highway 18, Sarah's mind raced. She was still 20 miles from home, and this stretch of road had no police stations, no 24-hour businesses, nowhere safe to stop. She decided to drive to the state police barracks in the next town, even though it would add 15 miles to her trip. But when she took the exit for the police station, something chilling happened. The car behind her didn't follow this time. Instead, it continued straight on the highway. Confused but relieved, Sarah drove to the police station anyway. She sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, gathering her courage, then decided she was being paranoid. It was probably nothing, just a coincidence. She drove home, taking her usual route. As she turned onto her street, her blood turned to ice. Parked directly across from her apartment building was the same car that had followed her. The headlights were off now, but she could see the distinctive shape of the vehicle under the streetlight. Sarah drove past her building and circled the block. When she came around again, the car was gone. She parked and ran to her apartment, keys ready, constantly looking over her shoulder. Once inside, she locked the door and called the police. They took her report but said without a license plate number or description of the driver, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, Sarah found something that made her question everything that had happened. Tucked under her windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper. Written in careful handwriting were the words, "You drive the same route every night. Same time. Same speed. I've been watching for 3 weeks. Last night, you finally noticed me. That's good. You're learning to pay attention. But I know where you live now. Sweet dreams, Sarah." The note was signed with a single letter, W. Sarah immediately called the police. They dusted the note for fingerprints but found none. They reviewed traffic cameras along Highway 18 but found no footage of the vehicle Sarah described. It was as if the car had never existed. Sarah changed her route home. She also changed her schedule, sometimes staying late at the hospital, sometimes leaving early. But it didn't matter. Every few weeks, she would find another note, sometimes on her car, sometimes slipped under her apartment door, always signed with the letter W, always indicating that someone was still watching. "You took a different route Tuesday night. Smart. But I was waiting at the traffic light on Elm Street. You stayed late at work Friday. I waited in the hospital parking lot until your shift ended. New haircut looks nice. I saw you at the salon on Saturday." The police installed extra patrols in Sarah's neighborhood. They advised her to vary her routine, which she was already doing. They suggested she move, but Sarah had just signed a lease and couldn't afford to break it. 6 months later, the notes stopped coming. Sarah thought maybe her stalker had moved on, found someone else to torment. She began to relax, to feel safe driving alone at night again. Then, one morning in September, she found the final note. "Sarah, you've been very careful these past few months. You've made this game challenging, and I appreciate that. But games must end eventually. Tonight, when you drive home from work, I want you to take your old route, Highway 18, just like before. If you don't, I'll come to your apartment. We can end this the easy way or the hard way. The choice is yours. Your friend, W." This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She packed a bag and drove straight to her sister's house 3 hours away. She called in sick to work and stayed there for a week. When she finally returned, she found her apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but someone had been there. Her bed was made with military precision. Her clothes were organized by color. Her refrigerator had been stocked with groceries she hadn't bought. On her bathroom mirror, written in what looked like lipstick, was a message, "You chose the hard way." Sarah moved out that day. She quit her job, broke her lease, and relocated to a different state. She never drove Highway 18 again. But sometimes, late at night when she's driving home from her new job, she checks her rearview mirror a little more carefully than most people do. Because Sarah learned something that night on the dark highway that most people never have to learn. Sometimes when you're driving alone, you're not really alone. And sometimes, the thing following you home knows exactly where you live. David Chen was the kind of person who helped strangers. It was just his nature. So when he saw someone standing on the side of Interstate 84 at 11 p.m. on a cold November night in 2020, he didn't hesitate to pull over. The figure appeared to be a young woman, maybe early 20s, wearing a light jacket that was completely inadequate for the weather. She stood beside a car with its hazard lights blinking weakly. David pulled his truck onto the shoulder about 20 feet behind her vehicle and got out. "You okay?" he called out as he approached. She turned toward him, and David could see she was shivering. Her long dark hair was damp from the light rain that had been falling all evening. "My car broke down," she said. "I've been waiting for over an hour, but my phone has no signal out here." David looked around. They were in a particularly desolate stretch of highway, surrounded by thick forest on both sides. The nearest town was 15 miles in either direction. "What happened to your car?" "It just died," she said. "The engine made a weird noise and then nothing. I don't know much about cars." David was a mechanic by trade. He offered to take a look, but when he popped the hood, he immediately saw the problem. The battery cables had been deliberately cut, not worn through, not corroded. Cut cleanly with some kind of tool. "Someone sabotaged your car," he told her. The woman's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible. Who would do that?" David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something about this situation felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "Do you have somewhere you can go tonight? I can give you a ride." "That would be amazing," she said. "I live about 30 miles north. Is that too far?" David almost said yes. That was too far. 30 miles north would take him completely out of his way, and he had to work early the next morning. But looking at this young woman, cold and stranded, he couldn't bring himself to leave her. "Sure," he said. "Get your stuff and I'll drive you home." She grabbed a small backpack from her car and climbed into the passenger seat of David's truck. As they pulled back onto the highway, David tried to make conversation. "I'm David, by the way." "Emma," she replied. "Do you have any idea who might have wanted to strand you out here? Ex-boyfriend, maybe?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't really want to talk about it," she finally said. They drove in silence for several miles. David kept glancing at Emma out of the corner of his eye. Something about her seemed off, but he couldn't figure out what it was. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. After about 10 minutes, David noticed something strange. The truck's interior temperature gauge showed it was 72 degrees, but he could see his breath when he exhaled. The truck was getting colder, despite the heater running full blast. "Are you cold?" he asked Emma. "No," she said. "I'm fine." But when David looked at her, he realized she had stopped shivering entirely. In fact, she didn't seem to be breathing at all. Her chest wasn't rising and falling. She sat motionless, like a statue. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Emma, you okay?" She turned to look at him, and David's heart nearly stopped. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire visible portion of her eyes, like looking into two empty holes. "I'm perfect," she said, and her voice sounded different, deeper, echoing, as if it was coming from somewhere far away. David fought the urge to slam on the brakes. They were still in the middle of nowhere, doing 60 miles per hour on a dark highway. He needed to get to a populated area, somewhere with lights and people. "Where exactly do you live?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma smiled, and David saw that her teeth were too sharp. "I live everywhere," she said. "I live in the spaces between places, in the darkness between streetlights, in the silence between heartbeats." The temperature in the truck dropped even further. David could see ice crystals forming on the inside of the windshield. His breath came out in thick white clouds. "I want you to pull over," Emma said. "Why?" "Because I'm hungry." David pressed harder on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed to 70, then 75. In the distance, he could see the glow of lights from the next town. If he could just make it there. Emma reached over and placed her hand on David's arm. Her touch was like ice, so cold it burned. "I said, pull over." "No." Emma's grip tightened. David could feel the cold spreading up his arm, into his shoulder, toward his chest. His vision began to blur. The truck started to drift toward the shoulder. But then David saw something in his rearview mirror that gave him hope. Red and blue flashing lights. A police car was approaching fast. Emma saw them too. Her black eyes widened with something that might have been fear. "You called them," she hissed. "I didn't," David said. "I never had a chance." The police car pulled alongside them, and the officer gestured for David to pull over. David complied, pulling onto the shoulder with relief. The moment the truck stopped, Emma opened the passenger door and stepped out. "Wait," David called, but she was already walking away from the truck, toward the tree line. The police officer approached David's window. "License and registration," he said. "We got reports of erratic driving." David handed over his documents with shaking hands. "Officer, there's something you need to know about my passenger." He turned to point at Emma, but she was gone, vanished completely. The only sign she had ever been there was the passenger door, still hanging open, and a patch of frost on the seat where she had been sitting. "What passenger?" the officer asked. David looked around frantically. "There was a woman with me. She broke down back on the highway. I was giving her a ride." The officer shined his flashlight into the truck. "Sir, I've been following you for the last 5 miles. There's been no one in that passenger seat." David's mind reeled. "That's impossible. She was just here. Look, there's frost on the seat." The officer examined the frost, then looked at David with concern. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" "No, I swear. There was a woman. Her name was Emma. Her car broke down about 15 miles back. Someone cut her battery cables. Sir, I drove past that stretch of highway 20 minutes ago. There's no broken down car anywhere on the shoulder." David felt like he was losing his mind. "Then where is she? Where did she go?" The officer stepped back and put his hand on his radio. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." David spent the next 2 hours at the police station, answering questions and taking a breathalyzer test that came back negative. The officers were polite, but clearly thought he was having some kind of mental episode. Finally, they let him go with a warning to get some rest. David drove home in a daze. He couldn't make sense of what had happened. Had he imagined the whole thing? But the frost on the passenger seat had been real. The officer had seen it too. The next morning, David decided to drive back to the spot where he had picked up Emma. In the daylight, he could see the area clearly. There was no broken down car, no tire tracks on the shoulder, no sign that anyone had ever been stranded there. But there was something else. About 50 yards into the tree line, David found an old wooden cross, the kind that marked a roadside memorial. The paint was faded and peeling, but he could still make out the words carved into the wood. Emma Rodriguez, age 23, died November 15, 2019. Beloved daughter and sister. Below that in smaller letters. Killed by drunk driver on Interstate 84. David checked the date on his phone. It was November 15, 2020. Exactly 1 year after Emma's death. He drove home and never spoke about what happened that night. But David learned something that most people never have to learn. Sometimes, when you stop to help a stranger on a dark highway, the stranger might not be a stranger at all. Sometimes, they're someone who never made it home. And sometimes, they're still looking for a ride. Jennifer Walsh had been driving for 6 hours straight when she realized she was completely lost. It was August 2021, and she was moving from Phoenix to Seattle for a new job. Her GPS had died somewhere in the mountains of northern Nevada, and her phone had no signal. The 2-lane road she was on wasn't on any of her paper maps. She had taken what she thought was a shortcut, but now she found herself driving through landscape that seemed almost alien. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush stretched endlessly in all directions. There were no houses, no businesses, no signs of human habitation anywhere. It was 10 p.m., and Jennifer hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Her fuel gauge showed less than a quarter tank. At this rate, she would run out of gas before finding her way back to civilization. She needed to find help, and fast. That's when she saw the lights ahead. At first, it looked like a small town, a cluster of yellow lights in the valley below. Jennifer felt a wave of relief. She could get directions, maybe stay at a motel for the night, and figure out where she was in the morning. But as she drove closer, something about the lights seemed strange. They were too uniform, too perfectly spaced, and they had an odd quality to them, flickering slightly, like candlelight. The road wound down into the valley, and Jennifer found herself entering what appeared to be a small community, but it wasn't like any town she had ever seen. The buildings were old, really old. They looked like something from the 1800s, wooden structures with covered porches and hitching posts. The street was unpaved, just hard-packed dirt. And despite the lights she had seen from the hill, the town seemed completely deserted. Jennifer drove slowly down the main street, looking for any sign of life. Every building was dark except for the street lamps, which she now realized weren't electric lights at all. They were actual lanterns, burning with real flames. She pulled up to what looked like a general store and got out of her car. The silence was absolute. No sound of traffic, no insects, no wind, just dead silence. The store's windows were lit from inside, so Jennifer approached and peered through the glass. The interior looked like something from a museum. Wooden shelves stocked with goods she didn't recognize. A cash register that was clearly from another era, and behind the counter, a man in old-fashioned clothing. Jennifer knocked on the door. The man looked up and walked over to let her in. "Evening, miss," he said with a slight accent she couldn't place. "You look lost." "I am," Jennifer admitted. "My GPS died, and I've been driving for hours. I don't even know what state I'm in anymore." The man smiled, but something about his expression made Jennifer uncomfortable. "You're in Nevada, miss. Little town called Prosperity. Been here since 1847. "I've never heard of it," Jennifer said. "Is there a gas station? My tank is almost empty." "Gas station?" The man looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned on his face. "Oh, you mean for your automobile?" "No, miss, we don't have one of those. Most folks around here still use horses." Jennifer stared at him. "Horses? What year do you think this is?" "Why, it's 1892, miss. August 15th, to be precise." A chill ran down Jennifer's spine. "Sir, it's 2021. August 15th, 2021. The man's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew cold. "I think you might be confused, miss. Why don't you come inside and sit down? Maybe have some water?" Every instinct Jennifer had told her to run, but she was trapped. Her car was almost out of gas, and she was in the middle of nowhere. She needed help, even if the person offering it seemed to be delusional. "Actually, I should probably get going," she said. "Is there a main road that leads back to the interstate?" "Interstate?" The man looked confused again. "I'm not familiar with that term. But you shouldn't be traveling alone at night, miss. It's not safe. Why don't you stay at the boarding house? Mrs. Patterson has rooms available." Jennifer backed toward the door. "Thanks, but I really need to keep driving." She turned to leave, but the man called after her. "Miss, I should warn you. The desert can be very dangerous at night. Lots of folks go missing out there. Sometimes they never find their way back." Jennifer hurried to her car and drove out of town as fast as she dared. In her rearview mirror, she could see the man standing in the doorway of the store, watching her leave. But as she drove up the hill leading out of the valley, something impossible happened. The lights of the town began to fade. Not as if she was driving away from them, but as if they were actually going out, one by one. By the time she reached the top of the hill, the valley below was completely dark. Jennifer pulled over and looked back. There was nothing there. No town, no lights, no buildings. Just empty desert stretching to the horizon. She got out of her car and walked to the edge of the road. In the moonlight, she could see into the valley clearly. There was no sign that a town had ever existed there. No foundations, no roads, no evidence of human habitation. But there was something else, something that made her blood run cold. Scattered across the valley floor were the rusted remains of dozens of cars. Old cars, new cars, cars from every decade spanning back to the 1950s. All abandoned, all empty. Jennifer ran back to her car and drove away from that place as fast as she could. She drove until her gas tank was nearly empty, and then she kept driving. Finally, as the sun was coming up, she reached a real town with real people and a real gas station. She never told anyone about what she had seen that night. She convinced herself it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But Jennifer did some research when she got to Seattle. She searched for any record of a town called Prosperity in Nevada. What she found made her wish she had never looked. Prosperity had been a real place, a mining town established in 1847, just as the man had said. It had thrived for about 40 years before the mine played out and the residents moved away. By 1890, it was completely abandoned. But here's the part that haunted Jennifer. According to historical records, the town had burned down in 1892, August 15th, 1892. The same date the man in the store had mentioned. Everyone in the town had died in the fire. All 127 residents. The cause of the fire was never determined, but witnesses from surrounding areas said they could see the flames from 20 miles away. Jennifer also found records of missing persons in that area of Nevada. Dating back to the 1950s, people had been disappearing along the back roads near where Prosperity once stood. Travelers who took wrong turns and were never seen again. Their cars were occasionally found, always empty, always in the same general area. The same area where Jennifer had seen all those abandoned vehicles scattered across the valley floor. She never drove alone through Nevada again, and she never took shortcuts through unfamiliar territory. Because Jennifer learned something that night in the desert. Sometimes, when you're lost on a dark road, you might find help. But sometimes, the help you find has been waiting a very long time. And sometimes, the people who want to help you never left the place where they died. At 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October 2018, Marcus Thompson's life changed forever. He was driving home from a late shift at the factory outside Bakersfield, California, when his truck started making a sound no driver ever wants to hear. A grinding, metal-on-metal noise that meant expensive trouble. Steam began pouring from under the hood, and Marcus knew he had to pull over before the engine seized completely. The problem was, he was on Highway 58, a desolate stretch of road that cut through the Mojave Desert. At this hour, in this location, he might not see another car for hours. Marcus coasted to the shoulder and popped the hood. Even in the dim light of his phone's flashlight, he could see the problem. The water pump had failed, and coolant was spraying everywhere. This wasn't something he could fix on the side of the road, even if he had the parts. His phone showed no signal. He was 40 miles from the nearest town in either direction. Marcus sat on the truck's tailgate and tried to figure out his options. He could start walking, but 40 miles through desert in the middle of the night wasn't appealing. He could wait for morning and hope someone would stop to help. That's when he saw headlights approaching from the east. The vehicle slowed as it passed, then pulled a U-turn and came back. It was an old tow truck, probably from the 1970s, painted white but faded and rusty. The driver was a heavyset man wearing overalls and a baseball cap. "Trouble?" the man called out as he climbed down from the truck. "Water pump went out," Marcus replied. "I'm stuck pretty good." The man walked over and looked under the hood. "Yep, she's done for sure. Name's Bill, by the way. I run Bill's garage over in Mojave." Marcus felt a wave of relief. Mojave was only about 20 miles away. "Can you tow me there?" "Sure can. Won't be cheap, though. After hours, call, long-distance tow. Looking at about $400. $400 was more than Marcus had in his bank account. But what choice did he have? "Do you take credit cards?" Bill laughed. Son, I'm a small-town mechanic. I take cash, and sometimes I take IOUs from folks I know, but I don't know you. Marcus checked his wallet. He had $63. I don't have $400 in cash. Can I pay you when we get to town? There's got to be an ATM somewhere. Bill scratched his chin thoughtfully. Tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You seem like a decent fellow, and I hate to leave someone stranded out here. You ride with me back to the garage, and we'll work something out. Maybe you can do some work for me to pay off the debt. It wasn't ideal, but Marcus didn't see any other options. What kind of work? Oh, this and that. I always need help around the shop. Nothing too difficult. Marcus grabbed his backpack from the truck and climbed into the tow truck's passenger seat. Bill hooked up Marcus's truck with surprising efficiency for a man his age, and soon they were heading west toward Mojave. The interior of the tow truck was strange. Everything looked original to the 1970s, including the radio, which was playing music from that era. The upholstery was cracked vinyl, and the whole cab smelled like cigarettes and motor oil. Been in the towing business long? Marcus asked, trying to make conversation. Started in 1973, Bill replied. Been working these roads ever since. You'd be surprised how many people break down out here. Desert's hard on vehicles. I bet. Do you live in Mojave? Born and raised. My daddy started the garage and I took it over when he passed. It's a family business. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Marcus dozed off, exhausted from his long shift and the stress of breaking down. When he woke up, they were pulling into what looked like a small automotive repair shop. A hand-painted sign read, Bill's Garage, established 1973. The building was old and looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. There were several cars in various states of repair scattered around the property, all of them older models. Marcus didn't see any vehicles newer than the 1990s. Here we are, Bill said. Let me get your truck unloaded, and then we can talk about that work arrangement. Bill positioned Marcus's truck in the garage bay and began lowering it off the tow truck. Come on inside, he said. I'll show you around. The interior of the garage looked like a museum. All the equipment was old, but well maintained. The walls were covered with calendars and posters from decades past. Everything had a layer of grime that suggested years of continuous use. Now, about that debt, Bill said. $400 is a lot of money for a working man. But like I said, I can use help around here. How about you work it off? Say 2 weeks at $20 a day? Marcus did quick math in his head. That was only $280. That doesn't add up to $400. Bill smiled. Well, I'll need to provide room and board while you're working for me. There's a little apartment above the shop. Nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a hot plate. Room and board runs about $60 a week. Now the math worked out, but Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to spend 2 weeks in this place. I've got a job back in Bakersfield. I can't just disappear for 2 weeks. Tell you what, Bill said. Call your boss. Explain the situation. Most folks are understanding about car trouble. And if he won't hold your job, well, I might have something more permanent for you here. Marcus tried his phone again. Still no signal. Is there a landline I can use? Phone's been out for a few days. Storm knocked down some lines. But don't worry about it tonight. You're tired, and it's late. Get some sleep, and we'll sort everything out in the morning. Bill led Marcus up a narrow staircase to a small apartment above the garage. It was sparse but clean, with a bed, a small table, and a tiny kitchenette. Bathrooms down the hall, Bill said. I'll see you in the morning. We start work at 7. Marcus was too exhausted to argue. He collapsed on the bed and fell asleep immediately. He woke up to the sound of someone working in the garage below. Sunlight was streaming through the small window, and Marcus could smell coffee and bacon cooking somewhere in the building. When he went downstairs, he found Bill working on an old Chevrolet. Morning, Bill said cheerfully. Hope you slept well. There's breakfast on the workbench when you're ready." Marcus found a plate with eggs, bacon, and toast waiting for him. "Thanks. This is really nice of you." "Well, you're going to be working hard to pay off that debt. Got to keep your strength up." After breakfast, Bill put Marcus to work. It was simple stuff at first: sweeping the garage, organizing tools, cleaning parts. The work wasn't difficult, but something about the situation felt strange. For one thing, they didn't seem to get any customers. Marcus worked all morning and into the afternoon, but no one came to the garage. No one even drove past on the road outside. "Pretty quiet around here," Marcus observed. "Midweek's always slow," Bill replied. "Weekends when we get busy." But it was Tuesday. Marcus was sure it had been Tuesday when he broke down. Around lunchtime, Marcus asked about using the phone again. "Line's still down," Bill said. "Should be fixed in a day or two." That afternoon, while Bill was working on the Chevrolet, Marcus decided to explore a little. Behind the garage was a small house where Bill presumably lived. Beyond that was a junkyard filled with old cars in various states of decay. What struck Marcus as odd was how old all the cars were. He saw vehicles from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, but nothing from the last 20 years. It was as if time had stopped in this place sometime in the early 1990s. As he walked through the junkyard, Marcus noticed something else strange. Many of the cars had personal belongings still inside them. Suitcases, clothes, family photos, as if the owners had just abandoned them and walked away. In one car, he found a purse with a driver's license inside. The license belonged to a woman named Carol Stevens, and it had expired in 1987. But the strange thing was, the license looked brand new, as if it had been issued yesterday. Marcus found similar items in other cars: wallets, IDs, personal effects, all belonging to different people, all with dates from different decades, but all looking perfectly preserved. He was examining a briefcase full of business documents from 1979 when he heard Bill calling his name. "Where are you, son? We've got work to do." Marcus quickly closed the briefcase and walked back to the garage. Bill was standing in the doorway, and his expression was less friendly than it had been. "Where'd you wander off to?" Bill asked. "Just looking around." "Interesting collection of cars you've got back there." "Those are projects. Been working on them for years. Some folks just abandon their vehicles when the repair costs more than the car's worth." That evening, Bill cooked dinner for both of them. They ate in silence, and Marcus noticed that Bill kept watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "How much longer do you think it'll take to fix my truck?" Marcus asked. "Hard to say. Got to order parts. Might take a week or two." "A week or two? For a water pump?" "It's an older truck. Parts aren't as easy to come by as they used to be." After dinner, Marcus went back to the apartment above the garage. He tried his phone again, but there was still no signal. He was starting to feel trapped. He decided to try walking to the nearest town in the morning. Mojave couldn't be that far away, and he needed to get word to his job that he wouldn't be in. But when Marcus woke up the next morning, he found that Bill had moved his truck. It was no longer in the garage bay. When he asked about it, Bill said he'd moved it to the back lot to make room for other work. "What other work?" Marcus asked. "I haven't seen any customers." Bill's expression darkened. "Son, I've been more than fair with you. I could have left you stranded on that highway. Instead, I brought you here, gave you food and shelter, and offered you honest work. The least you can do is show a little gratitude." Marcus spent the morning working on organizing parts in the garage, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to get out of this place. Something wasn't right. During his lunch break, Marcus decided to walk to the road and see if he could flag down a passing car. But when he reached what he thought was the main road, he found something that made his blood run cold. There was no road. Where Highway 58 should have been, there was nothing but desert. Scrub brush and sand, stretching to the horizon. No asphalt, no road signs. No indication that a highway had ever existed in this location. Marcus ran back to the garage, his heart pounding. "Bill!" he called out. "Where's the highway? Where's the road we came in on?" Bill looked up from the engine he was working on. "What road?" "The highway. Highway 58. The road where my truck broke down." Bill set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. "Son, I think you might be confused. There's no highway near here. Never has been." "That's impossible. You picked me up on Highway 58. We drove here on it." "Marcus, I think you might have hit your head when your truck broke down. There's no Highway 58. We're miles from any main road. This is desert country. Has been for 100 years. Marcus felt like he was losing his mind. "Then how did I get here? How did you find me?" "You walked here. Remember? Your truck broke down somewhere out in the desert, and you walked until you found my garage. You were half dead from dehydration when you stumbled in here 3 days ago." "3 days ago? No, that's wrong. I just got here yesterday." Bill's expression was patient but firm. "Marcus, you've been here for 3 days. You've been working for me for 3 days. We've had this conversation before." "No, we haven't. I would remember." "Son, I think the desert sun might have affected your thinking. Why don't you go rest for a while? We can talk about this later." Marcus backed away from Bill. Everything about this situation felt wrong. The missing highway, the confusion about time, the old cars in the junkyard. And now Bill was claiming he'd been here for 3 days, when Marcus clearly remembered arriving just last night. That afternoon, while Bill was working in the garage, Marcus searched the property more thoroughly. In the house behind the garage, he found something that confirmed his worst fears. On Bill's kitchen table was a stack of newspapers. All of them were dated 1992. Not reprints or collector's items, but actual newspapers that looked like they had been delivered that morning. The headlines talked about current events from 1992 as if they were happening right now. Marcus also found a photo album filled with pictures of Bill with various people over the years. But in every photo, Bill looked exactly the same age. Pictures spanning from 1973 to 1992, and Bill never seemed to age a single day. In the back of the album, Marcus found something that made his stomach turn. Polaroid photos of the junkyard, but taken from different angles and at different times. In each photo, there were different cars, but they all had one thing in common. Each car had a person sitting inside it, different people in different cars, but all of them had the same expression. They looked confused, lost, like they didn't understand where they were or how they had gotten there. Marcus recognized some of the cars from his walk through the junkyard. The same vehicles that still contained personal belongings. The same cars whose owners seemed to have just vanished. In the final photo in the album, Marcus saw something that made his blood freeze. It was a recent photo of the junkyard, and in the background, barely visible, was his own truck. And sitting in the driver's seat, looking confused and lost, was Marcus himself. He dropped the album and ran back to the garage. Bill was waiting for him, leaning against a workbench with his arms crossed. "Find what you were looking for?" Bill asked. "What is this place?" Marcus demanded. "What are you?" Bill smiled, and for the first time, his expression wasn't friendly. "This is my garage, son. Been running it since 1973. And I'm just a mechanic, trying to make an honest living. Those people in the photos, what happened to them?" "What people?" "The people in the junkyard cars. I saw the photos." Bill's smile never wavered. "I think you're confused again. There are no people in those cars. Those are just old junkers I've collected over the years." "Then explain the newspaper dates. Explain why you haven't aged since 1973. Explain where the highway went." "Marcus, I think you need to calm down. The desert can play tricks on a man's mind. Make him see things that aren't there, remember things that never happened." Marcus backed toward the garage door. I'm leaving. I'm walking out of here, and I'm going to find help." "I wouldn't recommend that," Bill said. "It's dangerous out there. Lots of folks get lost in the desert. Sometimes they never find their way back. I'll take my chances." Marcus turned and ran out of the garage. He didn't stop to get his belongings from the apartment. He just ran into the desert in what he hoped was the direction of civilization. But after an hour of walking, Marcus made a terrifying discovery. No matter which direction he walked, he always ended up back at Bill's garage. The building seemed to draw him in like a magnet, no matter how far he ran or which path he took. As the sun began to set, Marcus found himself standing once again in front of the garage. Bill was waiting for him in the doorway. "Ready to come inside now?" Bill asked. "It gets cold out here at night." Marcus had no choice. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and completely lost. He followed Bill back into the garage. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," Bill said. "You want to know what this place is? What I am?" Marcus nodded, too tired to speak. "This garage exists in a place between places. A pocket of time that broke off from the rest of the world in 1992. I've been here ever since, keeping it running, keeping it maintained. Why? Because that's my job. That's what I've always done. I'm a mechanic, Marcus. I fix things. And sometimes, the things that need fixing aren't cars." Bill walked over to a workbench and picked up a framed photograph. It showed a younger version of Bill standing next to a woman and two small children. "I had a family once," he said. "Wife, 2 kids. They died in a car accident in 1992. I was supposed to have fixed the brakes on our car, but I was too busy, kept putting it off. When those brakes failed, my family paid the price." He set the photo down and looked at Marcus. "I made a deal that night. A deal to fix my mistake, to have a chance to help people instead of letting them down. The price was staying here, in this place, forever." "What kind of deal?" "The kind that keeps broken down travelers from dying alone in the desert. The kind that gives lost souls a place to rest. You weren't the first person to break down on that highway, Marcus. And you won't be the last." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. The people in the junkyard are resting, safe, taken care of. Some of them chose to stay, like you're going to choose. Others eventually found their way back to the world, but they all had a choice. "What choice?" Bill smiled sadly. "You can stay here and help me run the garage. Time doesn't move here, Marcus. You'll never age, never get sick, never die. You'll just help lost travelers like I helped you. Or what? Or you can walk back into the desert and take your chances. Maybe you'll find your way back to the highway. Maybe you'll find your way home. Or maybe you'll just become another set of bones in the sand." Marcus stared at Bill in horror. "That's not a choice. That's a trap." "Everything's a trap, son. The only question is whether it's a comfortable one." Marcus spent that night lying awake in the apartment above the garage, trying to decide what to do. Stay in this impossible place and become like Bill, trapped forever in a pocket of broken time? Or walk into the desert and almost certainly die? As dawn broke, Marcus made his decision. He crept downstairs and out of the garage. In the morning light, he could see tire tracks leading away from the property. Fresh tracks that hadn't been there the day before. Marcus followed the tracks, walking as fast as he could. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat became brutal, but he kept walking. His water ran out after the first hour, but he didn't stop. Just when he thought he couldn't take another step, Marcus saw something in the distance. A ribbon of black asphalt, cutting through the desert. Highway 58. He stumbled onto the road and collapsed. Within minutes, a highway patrol officer found him and called an ambulance. At the hospital, Marcus tried to tell the doctors about Bill's garage, but they said he was suffering from severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. They said he'd been found only a few miles from where his truck had broken down, They said he'd been missing for less than 12 hours. Marcus's truck was exactly where he'd left it on the shoulder of Highway 58. The water pump was still broken, just as it had been when he'd pulled over. But in his wallet, Marcus found something that proved his experience had been real. Tucked behind his credit cards was a business card. Bill's Garage, established 1973. We fix what's broken. On the back, written in faded ink, was a message. The offer stands if you change your mind. Some folks need more than one chance to make the right choice, Bill. Marcus had the truck towed to a legitimate garage in Bakersfield. He never drove Highway 58 at night again, and he never threw away that business card. Because sometimes, late at night when he's driving alone, Marcus catches himself looking for a certain tow truck in his rearview mirror. Not because he wants to see it, but because he needs to know it's still out there. Still helping travelers who break down in the dark. Still offering them the same terrible choice he had to make. And Marcus learned something that night in the desert that most people never have to learn. Sometimes, when your car breaks down on a lonely highway, help comes at a price. Sometimes, the person who rescues you has been trapped in the same place for 30 years. And sometimes, the only way to escape is to leave someone else behind, to take your place. Four stories. Four people who thought they were just driving home on a dark road. Four encounters with something that exists in the spaces between the streetlights, in the silence between heartbeats. Sarah Mitchell learned that sometimes, when someone follows you home, they already know where you live. David Chen discovered that not every passenger who needs a ride is still alive. Jennifer Walsh found out that some towns died long ago, but haven't stopped welcoming visitors. And Marcus Thompson realized that help on a lonely highway might come with strings attached. These stories have one thing in common. They all started with something ordinary. A late-night drive, a routine commute, a simple act of kindness. But somewhere between the starting point and home, something went wrong. Something noticed them. Something was waiting. The next time you're driving alone at night, pay attention to your surroundings. Check your mirrors. Notice if the same headlights stay behind you for too long. Be careful about who you pick up on the side of the road. Think twice before taking shortcuts through unfamiliar territory. And if your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, be very careful about who offers to help. Because the darkness between towns isn't empty. It's full of things that are hungry for company. Things that have been waiting a long time for someone just like you to drive by. Sweet dreams, and drive safely. The road is darker than you think. If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video, it tells the algorithm you survived. 7. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave, or someone who thinks they are. Comment below. We want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.